Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into a crazy, complex web connecting local waste right to international trade wars. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through this, keeping a strictly neutral look at the facts as they've unfolded over the past few years. We're looking at this fascinating collision of macro geopolitics out of Washington, state-level environmental policy, and intense local municipal friction. Ultimately, it's a story about what happens when the very unglamorous reality of municipal solid waste gets caught up in billions of dollars of cross-border trade friction between the US and Canada. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll hit the Transboundary Waste Corridor, tariffs and trade warfare, Michigan pushing back, Ontario's landfill panic, and finally, the Dresden dump controversy. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The Transboundary Waste Corridor.
So let's start at the physical reality of the Ontario-Michigan border, tracking exactly how a trade policy in Washington eventually triggers a massive lawsuit in a small town. Ontario generates roughly 16.88 million tons of waste every single year. Now, while 73% stays in domestic landfills, a massive 27% gets exported straight across the U.S. border. And to be clear, this isn't household garbage. An agreement back in 2006 actually phased that out. We're talking primarily about industrial, commercial, institutional, and construction debris. It's managed entirely by the private sector, and it flows freely across the border, just like any other commercial commodity.
To put that 27% into perspective, you're looking at about 3.4 million tons of trash shipped out of Ontario and into the United States annually, and almost all of it heads right to Michigan. In fact, according to the state's fiscal year 2025 report, Canadian imports remain the largest foreign source of trash, making up over 14% of all waste disposed of in Michigan landfills. It is just a staggering volume of material moving across international lines every single day.
Why Michigan, right? Well, it all comes down to the dollars and cents. Michigan's incredibly low state-levied tipping fee, basically the surcharge you pay to dump trash, is just 36 cents per ton. Compare that to neighboring Ohio at $4.75 or Wisconsin at nearly $13. This massive disparity makes Michigan completely vulnerable to regulatory arbitrage. Honestly, it's simply much cheaper for private waste haulers in Ontario to load up trucks and cross the border than it is to deal with limited, much more expensive domestic landfill capacity in Canada.
Section 2. Tariffs and Trade Warfare.
Let's zoom out to the massive geopolitical squeeze threatening to shut this whole corridor down. Because what happens when free trade suddenly isn't so free anymore? In early 2025, the U.S. initiated a 25% universal tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico. Canada immediately readied billions in retaliatory measures. But here's the wild part. Ontario Premier Doug Ford actually bypassed the federal government and slapped his own retaliatory 25% surcharge on electricity exported to Michigan, New York, and Minnesota, states that heavily rely on Ontario's grid. The White House called it egregious and fired back with a threat to double metal tariffs on Canada to a whopping 50%. Facing that kind of economic destruction, Premier Ford quickly suspended the electricity surcharge the very next day just to bring the temperature down.
Throughout 2025 and into 2026, the legal ground was basically shifting under everyone's feet. Sure, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down some initial tariffs and exemptions under the USMCA, or CUSMA as it's known in Canada, ultimately ended up protecting about 85% of bilateral trade. But the administration kept the pressure on using Section 122 and 301 trade acts. Aggressive, targeted tariffs on metals and non-compliant components created deep, chaotic uncertainty for cross-border logistics under both the Trump administration and Canada's newly elected Prime Minister Mark Carney. For the waste industry, the lingering fear became very real. What if municipal solid waste is the next thing to get weaponized?
Section 3. Michigan pushes back. With this whole Fortress North America tension boiling over, state-level governments started using their own leverage. And the big question became, what happens if the border closes to trash? I really want you to think about that, because it's exactly what policymakers in both Michigan and Ontario began frantically asking themselves. If tariffs made exporting waste financially unviable, or if borders physically restricted the flow, where on earth does 3.4 million tons of Ontario's commercial waste go?
Michigan absolutely took the offensive. Governor Gretchen Whitmer proposed a jaw-dropping 1,288% increase to the state's tipping fee in her 2026 budget. That bumps it from that measly 36 cents all the way up to $5 a ton. The goal here is twofold. achieve regional parity with states like Ohio to finally deter the massive influx of Canadian trash, and generate an estimated $80 million annually. Those funds are earmarked to clean up Michigan's 24,000 documented contaminated sites and accelerate brownfield redevelopment. For Ontario, this meant the era of cheap Michigan dumping was rapidly coming to an end, tariffs or not.
Section 4. Ontario's Landfill Panic.
Now, staring down the barrel of a closed or ridiculously expensive border, the Ontario government practically went into a legislative panic. They suddenly realized they only had roughly 125 million tons of approved domestic landfill capacity left, which was highly concentrated in just a few sites. So they brought out a legislative sledgehammer. In June 2025, they passed Bill 5, the Protect Ontario by Unleashing Our Economy Act. This bill included what legal experts call Henry VIII-style provisions, granting the provincial cabinet the authority to create special economic zones. It was explicitly designed to fast-track domestic infrastructure and secure Ontario's industrial capacity by completely overriding local municipal zoning acts and established provincial environmental regulations.
Let me walk you through how Bill 5 actually played out on the ground. A private company had proposed a massive landfill expansion in a small town called Dresden. Back in March 2024, responding to local outcry, the province's environmental minister actually ordered a comprehensive environmental assessment for the project. But then, as the border crisis heated up, the province totally reversed course. They used Bill 5 to officially revoke the environmental assessment requirement for the Dresden facility. They reverted it to a much faster, less rigorous approval process, essentially forcing domestic landfill expansion onto the grid.
Section 5. The Dresden Dump Controversy. This brings us zooming right back in to the very real, very local fallout of all these international macro-level tensions. The town of Dresden essentially became ground zero for the Transboundary Trash War. To give you some background, in late 2022, a company called York One Environmental bought up a dormant landfill and former tile yard right on Irish School Road in Dresden. Their plan? Build a massive commercial and construction waste recycling facility and active landfill. It was expressly designed to process the exact type of waste that was historically sent to Michigan, but might soon be blocked or heavily tariffed.
But this provincial overreach with Bill 5 sparked fierce, immediate backlash, particularly from First Nations leaders. Walpole Island Chief Leela Thomas made it absolutely clear, stating that removing the environmental assessment was a direct threat to her community's well-being and their ability to practice their way of life. Indigenous leaders argued that their constitutional treaty rights to consultation were being completely ignored in the government's panicked rush to secure waste capacity.
And this pushback wasn't just rhetorical. Grand Chief Alvin Fiddler of the Anishinaabe Ozaukee Nation warned that they needed to look at every single option, including taking direct action. Civil liberties advocates and environmental groups allied with Indigenous leaders, warning the government that these newly created law-free special economic zones were going to face massive legal friction and serious on-the-ground resistance, heavily reminiscent of the Idle No More movement blockades.
Meanwhile, the local municipality of Chatham-Kent, which actually encompasses Dresden, officially opposed the whole project. They petitioned the federal government for an impact assessment, but that got rejected in late 2025. York One's response to the town's resistance? They sued the municipality in Ontario Superior Court, claiming they had grandfathered zoning rights. By April 2026, Chatham-Kent had to approve hundreds of thousands of dollars in extra legal funding, surpassing $350,000 in total, just to defend their own local bylaws against this provincially fast-tracked project. It is a messy, wildly expensive, and ongoing battle.
So what does this all mean? As this explainer shows, macro-level geopolitical brinksmanship always trickles down. A tariff threat in Washington leads to a defensive fee hike in Michigan, which triggers panic legislation in Ontario and ultimately forces a small municipality and local First Nations into an incredibly expensive existential legal battle over a landfill. It leaves us with one big lingering question. As North America renegotiates its borders and trade agreements, how many other local communities will be forced to bear the brunt of the continent's messy realities?